So what are the two main ways that we would like FRC participants to display the values of FIRST while competing for robotics competitions or in robotics competitions? Participation, there's participating, but how do we participate? It's very particular. There we are. Someone said GP, which is a short form for gracious professionalism. And there's another one. Oh, I see. So we have gracious professionalism, and what else goes? What is gracious professionalism? This is one of the core elements of FIRST. Oh, sure. Someone else, Michelle said, should I say that one too? Why not? It's kind of sharing cooperation. There we are, cooperation and gracious professionalism. So this is a competition, and yet there's a special element to it. And when you go to the FRC robotics competition, you will see this in practice. The teams are competing, yes, but while they're working on their robots in the competition, maybe one team is having a challenge, another team right beside them will come and help them with their robot, with the computer code, with some difficulty or challenge. The teams are helping each other as enthusiastically as they're competing against each other, and that's cooperation. And then this gracious professionalism. We remember this when things get difficult and there's a challenging situation that arises. We use a professional approach, and we're gracious towards our fellow cooperation participants. We are always thinking of their well-being. And I wanted to ask, and this is something we may be able to take a look at, when we do these Java programming sessions here, what do gracious professionalism and cooperation look like for a large group of participants, say, the FRC teams of Ontario? And I say that a little bit cautiously, as I know there are at least a few people from outside Ontario who are also joining us this evening. But what if we just continue to think about Ontario for a moment? What if we applied gracious professionalism and cooperation to our learning of Java programming? That's the question I have for you as we proceed this evening. I think that's a really good place to start. And well, here we go. Going to go to the next slide. Our introductions here. Well, I'm so sorry my camera is not working. It was working right up until just before the session this evening. Not sure what happened, but I would love to say hi and welcome to all of you. My name is William Neal, and in 2015, I started with one of my students. We started a FIRST robotics team, and it transformed my career, as some of you may have already heard. For the next 5 years, we worked curriculum and extracurricular activities into one coherent set of actions throughout the entire school year, and it changed my career and made a huge difference for those around us. And we saw this especially when we went to the FRC competitions to see the learning in action. When you see a robot working on that cooperation field, then that represents perhaps 25 or 30 students, or sometimes 80 or 90 students work for several months. And it's coming all together, and we can guarantee that a lot of learning has happened. After all, learning happens when action happens, not just pencil and paper. So it's a really great privilege to now be working with FIRST Robotics Canada, and to be able to share with you one of my favorite things, and that is computer coding. So our schedule begins at 7 o'clock and will end at 8:30. If there are things we don't cover, that's okay. Please make use of the email. I've already been in email contact with many of you, and we will be very happy to work in particular topics into the future sessions. So with that said, now we will go down to our schedule from the point of view of what we're doing each month. The introductory level Java will be in October and November. Now, these first few sessions are not necessarily going to be directly FRC related. We're going to focus more on what is the Java language and what do we need to know to be able to use it? Because in the FRC, we're going to be using Java, or at least for these sessions, we will be. And it's good to know how to use the Java first before we go into some more details about how the Java may be applied to an FRC robot. So that's October and November. We will use an online Java editor for the first 2 sessions, and that will allow all of our participants to install FRC Java on their computers in the meantime. And then we can do some technical support by email or other means to make sure that everyone has a chance to get their computer set up so that they can follow along. Then what we might call intermediate sessions may happen in December and January. That will be now applying what we've learned about Java to making things happen in an FRC robot. And if you don't have an FRC robot at your disposal, which most people don't, I don't even have one at my disposal now as I'm not at a school, that's okay. There are different ways that we can cooperate together and or use software and technology to test our programming skills. First, we have simulators. Second, we have small robots that you can order that are a little more affordable and easy to construct than a FRC robot. Or if you're really interested, you may be able to partner up with someone who does have access to an FRC robot, send over your code over the internet and see how it works on their robot. Maybe there are multiple ways for us to work together. And then hopefully in January and February, we'll have some more advanced sessions. These will show us, or maybe we'll learn together, how to do some of the more sophisticated functions in an FRC robot. For example, how to do a state machine where you press one button and multiple things happen, or something called PID, which is very precise movement of the robot's arms or pieces of the robot so that it flows smoothly and without jerking around or making very sudden motions. It allows for very smooth and precise motion. And third, we may do some vision processing, taking a camera feed, processing it with a coprocessor, and then allowing that to inform our robot in real time about targets and items on the field of competition and allowing it to behave accordingly. That's our schedule from now until February. We'll take a little break during the December holidays. So why Java? Well, first of all, there are several languages that we may use to program an FRC robot. Of course, we have our Java, our C++, our LabVIEW, and Python. Python is not officially supported, and LabVIEW is a very particular, perhaps an industry type language. Java is a very widespread language. It's officially supported by the FRC. It's well documented, and many other teams will use Java. It's a little bit easier than C++, and it does foster good programming habits. The disadvantages perhaps is that there's a little bit of a learning curve with Java. I found when I teach computer programming classes, Python can be learned almost immediately. And yet Python, if you are not careful in learning it, it can foster some not so good programming habits. But Java will give you some very good programming habits so you understand exactly what you're doing. The trade-off, though, is you have to be extremely careful when you work with the Java, just like any other computer program, to make sure you get the syntax right. The computer code, even a little comma or a semicolon can make all the difference when you're dealing with computer coding. And you'll find that in Java, it's particularly picky about certain points. So now we come to ways to learn computer coding. This is, for example, something you might compare to your English class. This is not an English class, but let's imagine English class for a moment. Learning syntax is, well, that's the building blocks of computer code. It's like learning grammar, your verbs and your adjectives, and your prepositions and your pronouns, things like this. That's your grammar. And You may also study examples of working code. Well, that's like literature and poetry. Studying someone else's code that's working, you can see how the building blocks fit together to make something that works. Just like a poem may involve certain literary devices to have a certain effect. And another thing you may do is actually complete a computer programming project to do some coding. Well, that's just like writing. Well, ultimately, later in the season, you may end up changing code on the fly during an FRC competition. Well, that is like a poetry slam. That's the ultimate, real-time, immediate effect, and very exciting. And that's where we're heading later this year. And hopefully we can all go there together. So that's a little bit about ways to learn computer coding. You can think about it a little bit like English class. But another thing that you should remember in English class, there are two ways that you could go about it. You could sit back and listen, or you can actively follow along and do all of the exercises and the homework. And if you treat it that way, you'll advance much more quickly. Now, let's look more specifically at ways to learn Java. There are many free online Java tutorials, and I'm using one as an example in this presentation this evening. There are numerous ones that I've used and my students have used. You'll find no end to these. There are also paid Java tutorials on sites like Udemy, Coursera, and etc. They're more expensive and they may be a little bit more comprehensive. If your objective, however, is to learn FRC coding, then you may not need to go to that depth or level because the FRC has lots of tutorials as well. There are numerous books that you can find about Java. The basic Java language has not changed in some time. Friends are a great place to learn about Java. And for example, in ICS3U or ICS4U are two particular examples of classes where you can learn Java, possibly even in your own high school. There are interactive coding sessions like this, and you can also learn while you're coding your robot. And I've seen many of my students, through various circumstances, pick up Java rather quickly because of the FRC season and its demands. And so lots of ways to learn Java, and hopefully we'll use several of these throughout the year to learn Java together. Now, FRC Java is a particular application of Java to move robots around on a competition field, and it uses a particular integrated development environment. Right now, the FRC is using a program called Visual Studio Code. It's made by Microsoft. And the particular version of Visual Studio Code comes from the FRC download on the First Inspires website. That's a very particular point. If some of you already have Studio Code on your computer, you may want to be careful to make sure you download one that's particularly suited to the FRC. It also uses what we call Java libraries. If you can imagine, a computer program is like a student, and what it is able to do is like a library of books that it can read in the matter of a split second. And if you want a robot to do something on the competition field, we use a library. In this case, it's called the WPI lib, or Worcester, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Polytechnic Institute. That's a post-secondary school in the United States. And they have very graciously provided the FRC with a library of programming tools for FRC robots. So we import that library and suddenly the computer knows all about how to operate a robot. And we also write our Java or our computer code for our robots in order to deploy it. And in this case, you'll see there's a computer shown here. Our current control system in the world of FRC is in the Roborio. Some people call it RoboRio. I've seen debates about this. I call it the Roborio, and well, sorry about that. That's just how I say it. And when you are finished coding on your laptop, for example, then you use a wireless connection. and you offload your code onto this Roborio. So those are three elements of FRC programming for Java. It uses a particular program for coding called an integrated development environment. It uses a particular set of libraries, which gives the Java code capabilities to control robots. And then we write it for the sake of offloading it or uploading it onto the control board, or in this case, the control computer of the robot. All right. A place here that you may want to sort of remark, and I'll see if I can put this in the chat. Oh, I can't. Whoops. As I'm presenting, I cannot, but maybe someone can type this out and put it in the chat. How can you find where to install FRC Java? And right here, you may search for FRC control system in a search engine. I did that today, and I came up with the website, which is right below there, documents.wpilib.org, English stable. And there we are. And that's where we may find all the instructions for installing Java on our computers. So our first order of business as a very large group of computer programming learners will be to prepare our own personal desktop or laptop computers with the right software. And we can do that over the next few weeks as we'll be learning a little bit about Java in the meantime. And when you go to this website, step 2 is particularly important. That's where we learn about installing the software for an FRC control system. And we have a WPI lib installation guide found on that page. That's how we go about installation of our FRC Java. So just taking a little moment here. It's very hard to see any participants. If you have some questions, maybe we can have, as we have so many participants, we can have questions kind of show up in the chat, and we'll take some time to answer questions as we go. So if you have questions, you may put them in the chat, and we'll look through the questions on the chat and see how we can best answer everyone's questions. We also may use those questions as a guide for future sessions in our learning of FRC programming. So here's the big picture of what we aim to do this year. Here is what you may call the driver station. There are two contexts in which we may use driver station. One, you could call that the entire laptop, which is used to control the robot. And also there's a program on that laptop called the driver station that we use to control the FRC robot. It uses a video game controller connected by USB to the laptop, which then wirelessly or during the competition through a Ethernet cable connects onto the playing field and somehow communicates with the robot. We use a wireless signal in general while we're doing deployment in a classroom to place the updated software code, our Java code, a Visual Studio Code program, onto the Roborio on the robot. So here's a little gray box signaling or signifying the Roborio. The radio is a wireless router that connects wirelessly to our control system. And then we sometimes, this is an optional one, we can have a coprocessor which may help us to process camera or video signals. And we can look at how we can set up this system and then use Java programming within it. And there are many other programs that go with this, and we'll see which ones are most important as we go along, especially given everyone's feedback and requests for particular topics. So just a summary, we're going to develop the software with Visual Studio Code, deploy it to the Roborio or virtually deploy it to a simulator, and then we'll test with our driver station or with a simulator program. All right, and now that brings us to the most basic sort of ideas of Java. And I'm getting into what we call Java syntax. And syntax is just the grammar of a computer programming language. Before I proceed here, I'll just take a moment in case there are any questions about the overall aim of our sessions. And just let me stop sharing for one moment and check the chat and see if there are any good questions here. Thank you. And some people have been putting everything in the questions here, posting some links. Oh, Worcester, thank you. It's Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And can we do this in Windows 11? Well, it is supported in Windows, Mac, and Linux, or Java programming. Hopefully Windows 11 will work. I haven't used Windows 11 yet, and if anyone has, you can let us know. I'll have to see, and we'll keep everyone updated about the Windows 11. And if it doesn't work in Windows 11, there are numerous possibilities. Oh, interesting. There's a memory leak in Windows 11. Anytime you get a new operating system, you have to work out a lot of bugs in the system. So if you've upgraded to Windows 11, you may want to try one of several possibilities. You can probably use Windows 11 to create a virtual machine of some other Windows. That is one way to do it. And there are some other possibilities. So we'll see how we can get everyone cooperating together to get a Windows 11 working. That's a question we'll definitely be looking at. So this is great. Thank you for your questions. And you don't have to download the WPI lib now, but over the next few weeks, you will want to do that. And we're giving that time so everyone has a chance to get their WPI lib working so that we can create and follow along all together. So there we are. And we can use a Visual Studio Code for this. What I'm going to recommend for this evening, though, since everyone has an internet connection, the simplest way for everyone to follow along without installing software is actually an online site that, well, I'm suggesting REPL, and I'm going to share REPL in a moment. First, I'll go over this Java code that I'm going to share on the screen again, and then we can use the online site because that will allow everyone to just get going without having to install software tonight. And it's probably not in the OR for Arch Linux, but if you have Linux questions on my spare time, I'll answer anyone's Linux questions or try to find out the answers together because I've used Linux for the last 20 years and that's my operating system of choice. So very glad to work alongside you if you have Linux questions. Linux works on everything except the driver station, and haven't got that working on Linux so well, but there is an open source driver station that I use as an alternative. So if you have Linux questions, you can maybe contact me by email outside of this session, and I'll be very glad to support that. All right. The C++, we have chosen Java as an introduction. Interestingly, though, when we show something in Java, the C++, it's almost like a dialect. It's very similar and almost the same. Many of the things between C++ and Java are very similar. So you probably will be able to follow along and then maybe have your team try to translate our Java code into C++ code using the API, the Application Programming Interface for Java and for C++. So for everything we have in Java, we have a similar item in C++. And so translation is actually not so bad. And I think that would be a really great service if we might come up with a C++ version of our Java code as we go along. So the Visual Studio code, code.visualstudio.com is there. I would suggest, though, following the instructions on the FRC website, because if you download a separate version of Visual Studio Code from Visual Studio itself, it may not work. So I'm just going to go back here and start sharing the screen again. And if we go back here, we're not going to actually cover the installation this evening, but I do encourage everyone to follow the instructions for installation here before going about installing Visual Studio Code separately. It's really important to follow those directions carefully, as many of the items in the software toolchain are correctly assembled through those instructions. And if you go outside of that set of instructions, possibly unpredictable things may happen. So my suggestion is, instead of going to the Visual Studio Code website directly, follow the instructions under the FRC control system as you've seen in this page here. All right, we'll continue along. And we have here Java syntax, the very most basic Java program, the Hello World program. This one, if I count, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code. Whereas in, say, Python, it would be 1 line of code. It would just be pretty much the print line, except print in Python. Print in brackets hello world with no semicolon, and you'll print hello world in Python. But Java lets you know that behind the scenes in any very easy to use language, there are other things going on. And Java will force you to think very systematically and very precisely about exactly what you're doing. And that's where all of these keywords are coming out. So I'm going to make a brief comment about each of these. And if you're missing something, or if something does not make sense, we will come back to each of these concepts through our next several weeks. So it's okay if you don't understand right away, just as when you hear some language being spoken, a different language, at first you won't understand it, but we'll start working with the language and fairly quickly you'll get to where you need to go. All right, the first thing here is public class main. This is a container for your robotics code. It encloses all of the code in the program in 2 curly brackets. So the first curly bracket opens up the code and the final curly bracket closes it. And everything inside there is called a class, or is the contents of the main class of the program. And that's what runs. The main class of the program contains all the code that's going to run when you run your computer program. And inside the public class main is what we call a method. And when I put it in my bulleted list here, it auto-corrected it to a capital M. So the first thing we should comment about is, first of all, well, Google Documents likes to capitalize when you don't want them to, but you have to be careful about that. In computer programming, you must be very precise about capitalization, because this first main with the capital M is distinct and different from the second main with a lowercase m. So the first main is the entire computer program, the main class of the program. The second main is the main method of the program. And the program will run that method automatically when we start up the program. We run the program, we say. All right, so one of the ideas, the big ideas that I've spoken about so far is that Java programs are found inside classes. A class is just a collection of computer code. And inside this class, this main class, is a method. I didn't put that keyword down here, but this lowercase main is a method, and that method is going to automatically execute when the program runs. And there's only one real command in the program, and that's using the computer program's system class. There's a class of commands having to do with output called out. And in that class of output, we have the print line. You'll notice in computer programming, the computer programmers are lazy, so they don't always use every letter in a word. So we see print ln here for print line. And we'll print a line of text, hello world. And because it's a line of text, it's going to hit enter and go to the next line. All right, you'll notice that that one command in our main method, in our main class, it terminates with a semicolon. If you do not terminate a command with a semicolon, then Java will continue on looking for the end of the command and get confused when it gets to the end of the program and doesn't find it. Then you'll get an error. And there's a little dot here, a period or dot, and that allows us to organize computer code in classes. So the system class contains some methods in the category of out, and here's a particular method, println, in the out category of the system class. And they separate in a hierarchy using these dots. So we can organize our computer code very nicely that way. So whenever you're going to do some output, you have to remember that in Java, we use the class of commands called the system class. A capital S is required, not a lowercase one. And in the output section of the system class, we have printing commands like println. All right, so those are a few of the main ideas in Java syntax. Now we can try this on our own. What I'm going to suggest, I think I'm going to talk about a few more things here, and then we're going to try this, and you see if you can try this in a computer, online computer Java program. All right, so a few other things here. The main class optionally can take some data as its input. And this is a string of variables like X, Y, and Z called arguments. And so we can give data to a computer program called arguments. In this case, we didn't use any of the arguments, so they're kind of just sitting there. The system and system.out I've already spoken about, and system.out.println. But here we have hello world. That is a particular quantity in computer programming called a string. And it's just text enclosed by some quotation marks. So we've enclosed our text in quotation marks. That's also an important thing to remember. So we've talked a little bit about classes, and we have our main class here. And we've talked a little bit about methods. We have our main method within our main class here. So you'll see I repeat things a little bit here and there, just to emphasize a few of the ideas. Always remember your brackets. I was just reminded of brackets because if you miss one of the brackets, your computer program will be looking for the other one, and it will get confused and give you an error. All right, now we can try it. And maybe you already have tried it, but we can try it here. There is a place on the internet called replit.com, or eplit.com, and it's at languages/java 10. And if you type this code exactly and then click the green run button, then you may be able to try this code right now. So as everyone is trying the code, I'll just stop briefly and see if there are any questions from everyone here. Let's see. I'm going to just give you a moment to type in these commands, and then we can take some questions. If you would like to speak up, you may speak your question for the moment. It just turns out that maybe I'll be able to see the chat here. Okay. Yeah, the comment, the IDE is better than REPL. Indeed it is. And the reason I chose the REPL is because we can immediately use it on almost any phone or any browser without any installation. So we can immediately start Java. And this gives us 1, 2, or 3 weeks to get our Java environments set up correctly on our computers. So that was a very appreciated comment. Thank you. So, and I think there's a nice sort of question there, isn't it extra complicated to add more classes on REPL? Actually, for Java, I don't really know. I've used REPL for Python much more than Java. And I'm only intending for us to use it for a little bit, the first 1 or 2 sessions, just to get a little bit accustomed to the Java syntax. And then when we're going to go into the FRC, we're going to be adding our extra classes and things within an FRC program on Visual Studio Code. So that is indeed probably correct. It's probably complicated to add more classes on REPL. It's just I haven't done that in Java. So some very helpful comments. Thank you very much to those who are here. So maybe by now you may have typed this in. There are a number of possibilities. If you make any of these items of the code a little bit different, there is a very good possibility that you will get an error. And there is a good point. The REPL actually fills it in for us so we can get it working right away. Now, these sessions, according to the question here, we're going to be posting them on the FRC, First Robotics Canada YouTube site, and I will send out a link with our next program update. So if you go to First Robotics Canada within the next 1 or 2 days, then you should be able to access this same session here. Okay. That's right. And if you're using another program like an IDE, an integrated development environment, there is a very good point. You do have to name it main.java. That's another issue we have avoided by using REPL for the moment. So good. So very helpful comments. Thank you very much. And if you type the code exactly, or if you slightly cheat, you allow REPL to type it for you, then you'll get this working. Don't worry, because we're going to do some slight modifications to the code now. All right. This brings us to a point of what I might call home fun. Java syntax home fun. I give a shout out to one of my colleagues in Stratford. When I first started teaching, Mr. Armstrong in Stratford used to say, okay, time for some home fun. He never called it homework. And indeed, mathematics is fun, and he was a math teacher. And indeed, Java is fun. And so at home, we may try a few of these challenges here. So one challenge for you is to explain the basic Java Hello World program to someone else. Now, you'll notice when you start learning a language, if, say, a very young individual, a toddler, for example, is listening to some adults, it is clear that the toddler does not understand everything that is being said. But over time, a child gradually learns a much wider variety of vocabulary and is able to use that. And in the same way, when we're learning something, it's impossible to understand everything right away. And even, you'll notice I didn't say anything about the word public or static or void. I didn't really explain too much about this string here or about these square brackets or arguments or things like this. However, as we go, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to work with these much more closely. But here is a good way to learn. If you've heard something, then one way to understand it better is to turn around and explain it to someone else. That's known as the Feynman method, after Richard Feynman, the noted physicist. And that's how he liked to learn. If he could explain something to someone else so that they could understand it, at least on an introductory level, then he said, well, at least you understand it to a certain point. So explaining things to other people will really help you to understand. So how could you explain something like this? Sorry, I was trying to highlight it. Public class main and all of this code here. And how could you explain it to someone so that they might in turn be able to explain it to someone else? Perhaps you may share your explanation next week. You might submit a little YouTube video or volunteer to explain it for us, and we'll see how well we can explain this code. I think that's a really good pattern to establish communicating with each other. And by explaining it, I guarantee you're going to understand it a little bit better. There we are. We have some success here. It worked. And there we are. Good. Home fun. Good. That someone thought that was funny. I guess homework is never funny for some people, but it actually is quite fun if you get into it the right way, I suppose. All right. So the next thing I'm going to share, and I'm kind of going in the same order as a website where there's some really great tutorials. The W3 Schools is a great site for learning various computer programming languages, including Java. And so the second topic that they cover is Java comments. And I'm doing that to follow the W3 Schools website, because you can use that as an excellent resource to back up what I'm saying here. And I'm not particularly recommending W3 Schools. I just happened upon it. There are many other similar sites. I used to use them a lot in my computer classes at school. So comments are not computer code. They are a section of the code that is only for humans to read. If I precede a line with 2 slashes like that, that's a single line comment. And if I enclose some text inside a slash asterisk, followed by an asterisk slash or slash star star slash, then everything in between is not seen by the computer, and your integrated development environment will even turn it to a different color if it's configured correctly. And that allows us to communicate between different people writing Java code, especially with an FRC robot. Chances are maybe 3, 4, or 5 of you will be working on the same code. So if one of you writes a section of code, it's a very good idea to share with your friends, what were you thinking? Oh, that's what this code does. It lifts the robot's arm. Okay, now I understand. Okay, that's really great. It's really essential when you get really big computer programs to use comments to communicate between all the team members so the code is manageable and it still works even if there are thousands of lines of code. So, oh yes, thank you for the W3 Schools COM Java. Is there one you recommend for starting? Is it thorough? So when I'm saying about starting, I think it's a great starter sort of resource, but there are many more thorough resources on the internet located in books or online courses or texts that are particular to Java, or even the FRC Java repositories and websites. So I think this is just to get us started. And yes. Oh, that's a really good point. Commenting your code is even more important than it working. Because if it's not working, at least the comments will say what it's supposed to be doing. Really very appreciated comment. Thank you, Elliot. So that's a really good point there. All right, we continue with some Java comments. Maybe we'll integrate now some Java comments into our very short code base. All right, so I've now modified the original set of code, and I'm also going to use this chance to do 2 things. First, to show comments in action, but 2, to begin speaking about variables. And variables, according to the W3 site, is just they're containers for your data. Well, variables you can also understand from math class. In math class, we say x equals 5. X is some quantity, and we say it's equal to 5. And in math class, we talk about something called numbers, number systems like integers and fractions, which are rational numbers and complex numbers and the like. So as we progress through our math classes, we have what we know in computer programming as data types. So this is an integer variable. You'll notice there's no decimal point. It's not 5.0, it's just 5. It's a counting number. In this case, an integer, it could be negative or positive. And it represents a whole number with no decimal or fraction after it. And in Java, you must be very particular about a variable. So if I'm talking about x is equal to 5, I precede it with int for integer. In this case, it's going to be an integer. If I don't say what type it is, Java will complain and have an error. It'll tell me, well, what kind of X do you mean? Whereas Python can look and say, oh, that's 5. Oh, I'll call it an integer. Python's quite easygoing about data types, whereas Java is very uptight about data types. You'll notice that as you program. So for the sake of other people in the computer programming team, I've put a comment there with 2 little slashes, declare the integer variable X. There, I've done that. So if this code isn't working, I can go back to the comment. Oh, I'm supposed to declare an integer variable. Maybe someone put another data type there. So I can change that. So Elliot's comment comes true there, or shows its value there. Now my next message, declare a string variable message. And message is a string variable. So I say to begin string. And for some reason, they capitalized this string in Java. Not quite sure why. System and string, they just get capitalized. So we just go with it. And we say that this string is equal to hello world. Now I go back to my system.out.println, but now I have 2 of them. System.out.println X and system.out.println message. So maybe I can just show that process in REPL. I'm just going to go here, stop sharing for a moment, unpresent for a moment, and go to REPL. And look at that. There's our main class. And we can see this happening here. I'm just going to put my screen sharing on one more time. And it comes up with the main class. I'm going to put a comment, declare integer variable X equals 5. Oh, what did I do wrong? My Python programming got ahead of me. In Python, that would have been fine, except for this little semicolon. There's a Python line, oh, X equals 5. But in Java, we have to say, no, this is an integer, X, and yes, we're finished. Good. Now we have declared our integer value variable X. And just to make the Python programmers really upset, we can put a bunch of space there and it's no problem. Okay, in Python, that would cause some errors too, because the spacing and tabs are very important. That said, it is very good practice to make your code line up nicely and have good form about it. And I'm sure we'll get into that. All right, declare string variable. Message. There, slightly changed my message. And now I'm not going to print hello world. This is a very good point here. Oh, and I also just realized I put my code in the wrong scope. I have to take this here, cut that out, put it down in here. All right. Okay, so I declared a variable X, an integer variable. Now I've declared a string variable. Now you see when I'm printing something particular here, as a experienced computer programmer, you would get very uncomfortable with just printing a particular thing. It's always good to print or to use variables where possible, because then the code is reusable. So I'm going to print my message, and I'm going to print out my X. There, that's the modification to my code. Need that semicolon. The spacing, we could probably adjust it. It's nice to line up things above and below each other. And we will speak about that. It really will help us to organize our code. So here, I'm actually going to space everything in here in 2 spaces just to make it line up nicely. So now we see the outer level is to the very left, and that's our class. The opening and closing of the class is at the very left. The next level is our method, our main method. And then the next level in, to the right, it starts the contents of the method. Now our code is a little bit more organized. All right. And that is correct. Someone has caught out the Python programmer for needing a string on the message. Thank you very much. Who is that? Noor. Thank you, Noor. The string is required just like the integer. So we say string message, and there it is. When you switch from one language to another, it takes a few minutes and a few days sometimes to get all of those things back. All right. So I've declared my integer variable, declared my string message, and oh, look at that. I'm missing one of these. So there's some very useful stuff here. These messages will give us clues as to what's happening in our code. For example, if I forgot that string, let's just take that out. We'll let it run and see what it says. Well, first of all, symbol, variable, message. It's having a problem, cannot find symbol. Well, that's because it's looking for string. You have to start with something it recognizes. String message, and then we have to end with that semicolon. Now let's try running it. Any errors? Oh, hello, FRC community. There we are. So we've debugged our program. Our Java integrated development environment, whether it's on REPL or in Visual Studio Code, will give us lots of feedback and different ways to debug our code. This is a simple program with only 10 lines of code. Imagine we had 1,000 lines of code, and somewhere in there, this string was missing. It could cause something else somewhere else in the program to also not work. And we will find ways to debug code like this. And, oh yes, that was a great comment. Thank you, Paul. String is itself a method, and inside strings, you can do things with the strings, and you'll see that in the, for example, the W3 Schools Java tutorials show us a number of things we can do with strings, like determine their lengths and add them together, a process called concatenation with strings. So I can add cat and dog into the same string by saying C plus D, for C is equal to cat and D is equal to dog. C plus D would be cat dog. I can concatenate them. Oh yes, there we are. And we're getting in some good vocabulary here, and we will see operators and overriding operators as we go through our Java coding tutorials. So yes, and I'm going to give the channel name very soon here. Maybe I should just give the channel first YouTube. First Robotics Canada. Oops. So on YouTube, we have First Robotics Canada. And it's in the videos, or has been. Okay, so there we go. We've now had a little bit of discussion about what a Java basic program is like, and we've talked about a few important ideas in Java programming. And we explored this particular program here, and that's a program that allows us to understand several things: what the main class is like, what the main method of the main class is like. And then inside there, we did some extra things. We declared a variable, in this case, an integer variable x, and then we declared a string variable. And remember that string, it's so easy to forget it. You might be thinking string, but you also have to type it. And also remember these little semicolons at the end. And finally, we printed out those two variables and we saw the results. REPL gave us some really great feedback and helped us to determine the nature of the errors. That's one of the skills we'll build as computer programmers. Sometimes there's an art to figuring out computer programming errors. It may be the case that there appears to be an error on line 5, whereas the actual problem may be on line 4, maybe because line 4 never finished or something. And thank you to Y. Bauer and Paul for the details about the videos. And oh, we're going to have a separate playlist for all of these coding videos. So that'll be great. There we have our Java variables. We're going to now think about, well, what can we do for variables home fun? What are some of the different types of variables available in Java? I think you will be able to find that in your online tutorials. There are many of them. And we will find out that in our WPILib library for robotics code, then we're going to find a whole bunch of other kinds of variables, like there'll be variables or classes or methods having to do with motor controllers and co-processing computers and or rather network variables and all kinds of things particular to the robots, sensors and the like. Even the game controller has its own class and variables and methods. What is a primitive data type? You'll find some of those in the tutorials. How do you declare several variables at once? And what is a final variable? These are just a few of many hundreds of questions we may be able to answer about variables and Java. Oh no, I cut out. I hope it's okay. Maybe someone was using the microwave upstairs. So these are a few questions, and I'm sure you may have more questions. And if you take these questions and then you try to answer them, I'm sure you're going to generate some more questions and you'll start to understand the process of learning computer programming. So what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to take the link for this particular presentation and put it in the chat, and then you can go through the material we did so far. And this will give you some things to do. First of all, to install the FRC Java, first of all, going back here, the FRC control system, Visual Studio Code, the WPILib libraries, and all of this. Then we can have you look at Java syntax again and try it out and review and ponder upon variables and comments. Try out another program with some variables in there and answer some of your own questions about variables, as well as these few to get you started. And now there are some references here. You can go to these references and find the REPL site, the w3schools.com. This is one place I turned for the Java tutorial. And at least my topics are in the same order as the Java tutorial, much more detail in that one. And then, of course, the wpilib.org robot control system. So this is where you can go to start installing software on your computer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to upload this slideshow, get the link for it and put it in the chat here. Whoa. Share, and we'll get some links. And here we are. We'll copy this link and put it in the chat. There we are. And now you can get access to this slideshow, which should get you started. And at the end of the slideshow, you'll find some links. It says under first robotics. Oh yeah, thank you. And we'll put anyone with the link. Sorry, I thought I did that. And good, thank you. The chat is so useful. It's so great to have everyone in the chat, just keeping everything going so smoothly. All right, now I think there are a few questions here. And I'm hoping I found everyone's question. Is it possible to also have this slideshow? Oh, good. That question was just answered here. Oh, whoops. Excellent. We're on the same page at the same time. That's great. And good. It's working now. Okay, well, this is a great time for us to have any other questions. I'm going to just put this back here. Very happy to answer your questions about FRC, about programming. about resources that are out there or anything, or maybe you have questions for each other. Oh yes, can a variable represent anything other than an integer? So I will give you a few examples here. Yep, there are many things that the variables can sort of represent. So first of all, we could go about back here. And one thing that's really useful for computer programming robots, Boolean. We're on the same page, definitely. I see the syntax for Boolean. Well, let's see if we can figure out Boolean. Let's try declaring a Boolean variable. Let's try this. All right, I just tried to declare a Boolean variable, and I don't actually go around memorizing things, and I'm not sure if I got it right, but I made my best guess. And let's see if it's working. Oh, is system out robot moving? There we are. We have to terminate it with a semicolon. And is there another one? Oh, my Python programming is overriding everything. Let's see. Good. Robot moving is equal to false. I bet you it's probably, oh, there, the color changed. So we use a lowercase false. In Python, we use a capital false. The robot is moving, false. And then true, the robot is moving. And let's see if it does. Yes, true. A Boolean variable is a logical variable, and it's designed to have two states, true or false, or 1 or 0. And it allows us to make logical decisions. So if the robot is moving, for example, then we can turn off or on certain other systems in the robot. And there's one different kind of variable that we may use. Now I see some messages coming in through here. True or false. Boolean name equals true. Thank you. There we are, lowercase. So you'll notice there the true or false, it's very particular. It does not like it if I do it Python style and I make a capital. It will just say what, and it doesn't understand that. Error, it needs to have the keyword in Java, which is a lowercase t on the true. And then that works here. And there's a nice lead in here. One of the questions I had in the presentation, Booleans are a primitive type. And there is the distinction, the primitive types are lowercase. Thank you, Elliot. And we will see that in our W3 Schools reference. Oh yeah, float. There's another one. Maybe we can try a float. Thank you, Newer. Let's try a float because they're very, very useful. All right. I'm thinking about computer programming for robots. So I just declared a floating point variable for the encoder distance. The encoder distance may be the distance in meters that the robot has traveled as measured by its encoder. And let's try printing it out. Now I'm going to put my variable there and encoder distance. There we are. And I'll put the units down because your physics teachers will want you to state the units. There. And let's see if it works. Now we can say that our robot has, oh, we can't. And you'll notice you have to be very, very careful when spelling variables. There, we're just missing a little R. And now encoder distance is equal to 4.55. I bet you we need an F there for float. Oh, that's what we need. We want a encoder distance.
F at the end.
Pardon? Oh, F at the end.
Or F at the end.
There we are. Good, there we are. Thank you very much. And now we've done 4.55. That's too many decimal places of precision, but now we can display that our robot has moved. There we are. Thank you very much. And floats are decimals, 4.3, negative 6.8. Thank you so much. The chat is very useful here. And you'll notice I've used a mix of print and print line. Print does not move to a new line, whereas print line does. Excellent, some very rich conversation in here. The purpose of FRC Java. Well, that's an interesting sort of thing here. The FRC Java allows us to do particular operations that are only possible on FRC robots, like operate motor controllers, read sensors, read encoders, and interact with the robot using a special device called the Roborio. So as you see there, my debugging process was very important, and Y. Bauer has made a very prescient comment there. And the output of the right-hand screen there helped me to determine what was wrong. The FRC Java library provides extra functions that relate to robot functionality. Thank you, Ryan, and that sounds right. And VS Code is very good as well. It changes color. Particular items, depending on what they are, they change color in the VS Code. And oh yes, Alex has a really great comment. Google knows an awful lot, way more than we do. For example, I knew something about the F there, but I had forgotten that it goes at the end. So if my very kind participant this evening had not pointed out that the F should go at the end, I would have probably gone on to Google to find out the answer. And let's see, on the encoder. Oh yes, thank you. Some very good debuggers out there in the audience. And the meeting is going to be going on till 8:30. And right now we're just doing answers and questions and interaction here. So I'm just seeing a lot of great sort of interaction here. You may feel free to ask more questions. And if we run out of time at 8:30, we'll take the remaining questions and we'll wrap them in to some future sessions. All right, so there we are. Ryan has another very prescient comment. Programming is 90% Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow is an example of global cooperation as people are graciously and professionally putting up their working robot code as answers to numerous people's questions from all around the world, and that helps everyone. So Stack Overflow is your great friend. Public class mode in the start. And so just a few things here. Public in general can be seen by other parts of the computer program or other computer programs. Private is only available inside a particular scope of the computer program. And I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit more about public and private, static and dynamic, or final, different keywords that have to do with our computer code in our next session. So let's see here. is there a way to take input from the terminal? I believe there is, but whereas I can remember how to do it on Python, I have to look it up on Java. There is a way to get some kind of like a input stream or buffer and feed that into a variable. So that would be a very good place to do that. Now, I'll show you, since I don't remember how to do that, this is what I would probably do. And here's a good example of how Stack Overflow may help us. We'll just go onto the internet here and take keyboard input in Java. Ah, it's a scanner. Now I remember. I've seen that. My son took Java in his school, and we use this special imported library, the scanner, and then we take a new scanner, and then we get a line, and then we can output it. Well, let's just see if that works. I'm going to attempt to sew this into our program and see if it will work at all. We're going to try importing the Java Utilities scanner, and then make a new scanner and input from it. Maybe I will make the computer program a little bit, well, we'll see. We'll just put it here. There's a scanner, and it's going to allow me to scan the input string. And instead of sending that message out, I'm just going to print the input string. You'll see there, because I changed this to the input string, I'm no longer using the message. My FRC Java IDE, Integrated Development Environment, would actually argue with me and say that message is never used. At the moment, I don't think Java is too upset about that. Let's see if that works. And good. Oh, yes, it allowed me to type in some text, and then it printed the text. So there we are. I don't know how to input text on Java, but luckily the internet does. And did that come from Stack Overflow? I don't think it did, but if it didn't, I'm sure we probably would have found something on Stack Overflow somewhere in there. Stackabuse.com, well, there's similar ones like Stack Overflow. So there are numerous ways to figure out how to import text from the keyboard and to do almost anything else that you would like to do. So some other discussion here. Ah, nice. Whoa, that's a really great point. Thank you to Lucas Joel. A really good Chrome extension is grepper, and it saves time. If you look up a question on Google about coding, it will display the answer at the top of the search engine results. Grep being a Linux and Unix-based command for finding things. So grepper would be a very appropriate extension name for that. Great. Thank you very much. Wow, so much great interaction here on the chat. And that's a great point. Public means it can be accessed by other classes. And there's some other more technical discussion here. If something is private or protected, you can use reflection to manipulate it. That's something I would really like to go into myself. I haven't deeply explored that idea. And some very good things. Elliot has pointed out there are some things you can do, but should you do them? And maybe Elliot is saying we probably wouldn't want to manipulate our private or protected methods or classes or variables because that's probably not good computer programming form. So there we are. And it's interesting, Elliot and Ryan are here having a conversation about what amounts to computer programming form, how we communicate between different parts of our program. And in the FRC, we get into that through various programming frameworks. it's important to know. And if you go onto the internet, you'll see much debate about which ones are the best or which methods work or should be or should not be used. Good. So there's a nice resource here, a YouTube video from a team in Alberta. I think I know which one that is. Not sure, but I did see something from an Alberta team earlier this week. And there's lots of great stuff out there. You'll see all of that there. What Linux distro am I using? I'm using Pop! OS on a System 76 computer. And oh, someone was right. It is Pop! OS. It's Pop! OS, and it's my favorite computer ever. It came with my favorite software already installed. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now largely just into informal questions. And if you have any other questions, please feel most welcome to sign in, or sorry, to send an email to continue in the chat, or use other means. And I'm hoping that our sessions can continue to be this interactive, and maybe we may be able to have a few little cooperations during our time together. Once we have enough computer wherewithal, maybe we can get into some cooperations and have a few groups of people do some quick coding on the fly. Yes, and I can see the discussion is now talking about Linux. I have tried Arch before. One of my very best students ever, he installed Arch on pretty much every machine he could get his hands on. Arch is great. It just has a lot of overhead to get to learn how to use it. And because I needed to use it in the middle of an FRC season, I just switched back to Ubuntu at that time. I really do like the Arch and its ideas. I just couldn't get into it because I needed answers right away, and I needed my computer to work right away, and Arch takes a while to set up. Oh. When we say classes, so that's a really interesting idea as well. It's not a class of people. Let's go back to our Java code here. So a class, the way I like to talk about what a class is a collection of, in Java, methods and variables that does a particular function. And we actually use a class called class robot in our Java programming for FRC. And that's a collection of methods and variables that gets jobs done in the FRC robotics competition. So that's an interesting thing. What is a class? A collection of methods and functions. Now, in this particular class, we only have one method and one or two little variables. And we will find later on, our robot programs will have many methods, and they call each other. One method calls on the services of another method. One method may send a variable to another method and get an answer back as another type of variable. And therefore, we need to find ways for methods to call each other and communicate between each other using variables. And that will come in our upcoming classes. So there we are. Some a method now, another word for it. In Python, we tend to use the word function. So we'll go back to our example here. A method is a set of code that executes as a package. So, and it accomplishes a particular task. A method is a way to organize a computer programming function in a collection of code that can be reused as well. For example, I can have a method to print out the numbers 1 through 10. So anywhere in my program that I want to print out the numbers 1 through 10, I don't have to go through all the programming steps again. I just call that method with a single line of code. So, there's some very particular things here, which is interesting. And when I use function, I'm talking about my understanding of a Python function, which is distinct from here in Java. And Elliot has let us know a function does not return a value. So yeah, some methods or functions return values and others don't. In this case here, Elliot has specified that functions don't. And now we've also got some discussion of the word void. I particularly didn't use the word void this evening, but the word void in this case means we're not expecting any input variables. And actually output, we're not going to output any variables rather. And in here, in C++, particularly, we use the word void as well. For input or output, we can state that it's not going to take any input and not going to give any output using the word void. Oh, yes, thank you. So methods don't particularly take a input and functions do, according to Elliot. Still, I'm using my Python hat more than my Java sometimes, so my precision in my Java is not always up to that vocabulary, but that's really good. Thank you. Good. Something like an input function would return a string. So yeah, thank you very much. Oh, and thank you, Paul. There's a method would be a skill that you have, for example, tying your shoes, brushing your teeth, or shooting a basketball. And maybe Paul's getting at it slightly. It may not have a particular result or confirmation that it's done, for example. Sometimes when you finish a method, you can send a message to another method saying, yeah, we're done, and here's the answer, or here's the result. Good. So there we are. I think we will very soon wrap up our computer programming class. We've had well over 70 people on the call this evening at different points. And we are most appreciative of your participation here. Coming back to our very first comment, what would it be like if, say, Ontario were to apply gracious professionalism and cooperation to the task of computer programming throughout the FRC community? And one way we might look at it is exactly what's happening this evening. Some really amazing discussion and interaction have been going on in the chat, and really helpful comments, and that's really helped to enhance the learning environment. I'm hoping that you may take this slideshow and use it to do some further research. Just before I go, I'm just going to give one more advertisement for the W3 schools. I'm not advertising them, so to speak. I'm just pointing them out because I've been using them as a means. I've been using this tutorial as a means to select the order of topics, that's all. And much more rich material you will find down here in the Java tutorial in W3 schools and in many other places. So I think we'll finish with one final comment here. I found something on Stack Overflow that discusses a method and a function. So a method is on an object, whereas a function is independent of any object and outside of any class. That's interesting. And there's some discussion here. It's quite a detailed comment comparing C, C#, C++, and Python. So that's for further reading and discussion. And thank you very much again, Ryan. That's great. So Stack Overflow has come to the rescue again. Ladies and gentlemen, participants of FRC, everyone, we're really happy that you've joined us. Would really love to hear by email any of your feedback and comments. And through that means, we will be very happy to present other topics. And it was so great to be with the FRC community again, as we've been largely isolated from each other for a good part of 2 years. Looking forward to seeing you next week. We will post this session up at the earliest possible on our YouTube channel, possibly in a new playlist. and we'll look forward to seeing you all very soon. So I wish I could wave goodbye, but you can imagine that I'll do that, and hopefully my camera will be unbroken next week, because I don't know what I did. I think it's being used by another program or something. So we'll look forward to seeing you all very soon. Have a great week and look forward to hearing from you by email and the like. So take care. We'll see everyone very soon.